They told us it was just a game, but by the end, I wasn't human anymore. Let me tell you about the experiment that ruined my life. I've been in here for 3 days. No food. No sleep. I locked the door to keep them out, but mostly, to keep myself in. My mom's on the other side, waiting with a bat in case I stop answering her. She doesn't think I'm her daughter anymore. Honestly, I don't think I am either. It started in July. A social experiment. 10 teenagers in a mansion. 5 boys. 5 girls. No phones, no contact with the outside world. They said it was for science, a test of endurance. I didn't care about the prize money. I just wanted to get through the summer. But that house wasn't a test. It was a trap. And now, it's in me. It's changing me. I can feel it, crawling under my skin, in my head. Whatever it is, it's waiting. Watching. And when it's ready, I won't be me anymore. I'll be one of them. They said it was voluntary. A summer activity to keep us busy, 10 teens, 5 boys, 5 girls, all in a mansion. My mom didn't give me a choice. She handed me a flyer and told me it would be good for me. She didn't care that something about it felt wrong. I should have walked away when I saw the testing center. The windows reflected everything except warmth. Inside, we weren't allowed to see each other clearly, just outlines under harsh lights. It was designed to strip us of connection, even before the experiment started. They took our names, gave us fake ones. I was Amelia. They said it was for confidentiality, but I think they just wanted to remind us we didn't matter. When the needle went into my eye, some kind of injection to blur our vision, I realized this wasn't about endurance or teamwork. It was about control. The mansion should have been beautiful. But it felt like it was waiting for us. The mix of decay and luxury was wrong, like dressing a corpse in expensive clothes. Even the air around it was still, too quiet, like the world had decided to stay away. We met in the foyer. 10 of us. Strangers. They made us separate right away, boys downstairs, girls upstairs. I didn't care much at first. Abigail, a quiet blonde girl with a nervous smile, introduced herself. She seemed relieved just to have someone speak to her. Then there was Esme, who practically marched over and announced she was running for future president of the United States. Abigail was timid but kind. Esme? She had this energy that filled the room, like she needed to prove something every second. Rhea, though, she acted like we should all already know her. She was an influencer, always posing, always watching. And then there was Jane. She barely said a word, but when she did, her voice was flat. Detached. She seemed like the type who didn't want to be noticed, or maybe wanted us to think that. The boys were different. Freddie tried too hard to be everyone's friend, tripping over his own feet to make us laugh. Kai. He watched. Silent, calculating, always a step away from the group. I couldn't tell if he was shy or just waiting for something. Then there was Ben. He took charge immediately, barking orders like we'd elected him leader. He had this way of looking at people like he was figuring out what he could take from them. I didn't know them then. Not really. But that house, it changed us. And it was changing me before I even realized it. I thought I was just disoriented from the injections, but every step inside felt heavier. Like the walls were pressing in. Like the air itself was learning who we were, and deciding who we'd become. The nights in the mansion grew longer. At first, it was the small things, a door that would creak open, though no one had touched it. Lights flickered at random, their hum sharp against the heavy silence. Then came the sounds. Low, faint murmurs from empty hallways. footsteps on the floors above when everyone was accounted for. I thought I was imagining it, but the others noticed too. Esme kept checking over her shoulder during our meals. Abigail barely slept, jumping at every sound. Even Ben, always so sure of himself, started snapping at Freddy for breathing too loudly. The first symbol appeared on the wall above the stairs. A jagged triangle, carved deep into the wood. None of us claimed to have done it, but no one believed each other. By the end of the week, more symbols showed up, circles overlapping like a broken chain and lines that crossed over themselves in shapes too precise to be random. We should have been more worried, but by then, the food had run low, and the house felt colder. The boys, once loud and overbearing, grew quiet, moving as a group and avoiding us. Ben stopped talking altogether, staring at us with something like hatred. One night, we heard them yelling in their room. A crash, a shout, then silence. The next morning, Freddy had a gash on his forehead. He said he fell, but his knuckles were bruised, and Adam wouldn't look at him. I woke up a few days later to find blood on my hand. It wasn't mine. My fingernails were caked with it, thick and dark, but I couldn't remember anything after going to bed. When I showed Abigail, her face turned pale, and she refused to sit next to me that day. The mistrust spread quickly. Rhea accused Kai of stealing food. He didn't deny it, just grinned like it didn't matter. When we went to check the pantry, half of what was left had been stuffed under a loose floorboard. Esme started locking our door at night, and when Freddy pounded on it at 2 in the morning, screaming for help, she refused to open it. His voice cracked with fear, but when we peeked through the crack later, he was gone. That morning, we found scratches along the banister, long, uneven marks, like claws had raked across the wood. Then came the message. It was carved into the dining table, the letters deep and jagged, "You're the prey now." No one admitted to doing it, but it didn't matter. We all knew what it meant. I started losing time after that. Hours would pass without me realizing it. I'd find myself in strange places, sitting by the pool at midnight or crouched in the kitchen with a knife in my hand. I heard my name whispered in empty rooms. The first time it happened, I brushed it off, but then the urges came. Sharp, intrusive thoughts that didn't feel like my own. My mouth would water at the scent of Abigail's perfume. My fingers twitched when I saw Esme's exposed neck as she tied her hair up. By the end of the second month, I wasn't sure who I feared more, the boys or myself. The air in the mansion turned oppressive. It wasn't just the tension, it felt like the house itself had grown alive, watching, waiting. The once crisp edges of reality blurred. Conversations devolved into snapping and silence. Sleep became dangerous, and food was a distant memory. We weren't just surviving. We were changing. Ben was the first to snap completely. It started during another argument. He and Esme were shouting in the foyer, their voices echoing like gunfire. I stayed near the stairs, too exhausted to intervene. Then Ben grabbed the edge of the banister. His knuckles turned white, veins bulging as he leaned forward. "Shut up," he hissed. His voice was lower, rougher. His eyes didn't just glare, they bore into her, dark and wild. When Esme stepped back, I saw his fingers flex, twitching unnaturally, like he was about to pounce. Before anyone could stop him, he lunged. Esme screamed, but Abigail yanked her away just in time. Ben's hands slammed into the wall instead, nails scraping deep grooves into the plaster. He turned to us slowly, breathing hard. Blood dripped from his fingertips where the force had split his nails. His lips curled, showing teeth that looked sharper than I remembered. "You're all weak," he growled. Then he stalked away, his steps uneven but purposeful, like he was holding something back. After that, the boys rarely left their side of the house. When they did, they moved like predators, silent, watching, waiting for an opportunity. Freddie was gone most of the time, disappearing into the basement. Kai followed Ben everywhere, his head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something the rest of US couldn't hear. But it wasn't just them. One night, I woke up with a metallic taste in my mouth. My pillow was wet, and when I turned on the light, I saw it, blood smeared across my lips and chin. My shirt clung to me, damp with sweat and something else. I stumbled to the mirror, desperate to understand, and froze. There were scratches on my neck. Not deep, but deliberate. My nails were clean, but the image wouldn't leave my head, my own hands clawing at my throat in the dark. I started locking my door, though it didn't help. The hunger wouldn't leave. It wasn't just for food, it was something deeper, something raw. I'd catch myself staring at Esme or Abigail, my mouth dry, my body tensed. Abigail noticed. One evening, as we huddled in the kitchen, she slid away from me, her back pressed against the counter. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "You're scaring me," she whispered. I wanted to deny it, to tell her I was still me. But the words wouldn't come. I wasn't sure they were true anymore. The breaking point came during what should have been a quiet night. The house was silent except for the faint creaks that had become all too familiar. I was in Abigail's room with the other girls. We'd been locking ourselves in together for safety. Esme was pacing, her fists clenched. Abigail was shaking, her eyes darting to every shadow. Jane sat motionless, her expression blank. Then the banging started. It was loud, violent, coming from the boys' side. The sound of furniture being thrown, glass shattering, screams, human, but not. We stayed frozen, listening as the chaos grew closer. Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs, followed by snarls and guttural roars. The doorknob rattled. Abigail screamed, clutching my arm, and Esme grabbed the nearest object, a lamp. "Stay quiet," I mouthed, though my heart was hammering loud enough to drown out the words. The banging stopped, replaced by a low, dragging sound. Something, or someone, was being pulled down the hall. We didn't sleep that night. By morning, the house was silent again, but not empty. When we stepped into the hallway, the walls were streaked with dark smears. The floor was sticky underfoot. In the foyer, Freddie lay crumpled at the base of the stairs, his body twisted unnaturally. His face was pale, lips blue, eyes wide open but lifeless. Ben stood over him, his chest heaving. His shirt was torn, blood staining his arms and face. When he turned to us, his eyes gleamed with something inhuman. "He couldn't keep up," Ben said, his voice calm, almost bored. Esme screamed, but he didn't flinch. He just smiled, a sharp, cruel expression that sent a chill through me. "You'll see," he added. "Soon, you'll understand." We ran, locking ourselves back in the room. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the boys anymore. Whatever was happening to them, it was happening to us too. That night, I saw the message again, this time carved into the floor by the door: "The prey doesn't run forever." I couldn't stop the images that followed. My own hands clawing, teeth sinking into flesh, blood pooling beneath me. The hunger surged, and I pressed my back against the wall, gripping the knife I'd stolen from the kitchen. The next morning, Elizabeth's voice echoed through the house. Calm, clinical, she announced that the experiment was over. We were to leave immediately. But as we gathered in the foyer, she appeared on the screen. Her smile was sharp, calculated. Nathaniel stood beside her, his arms crossed, his face pale. "It's fascinating, isn't it?" she began. "How quickly the mind adapts to survival. How easily it sheds morality for instinct." The screen flickered, showing clips of us, eating, fighting, hunting. My stomach turned as I watched myself bite into raw meat, blood smeared across my face. This wasn't about endurance, Elizabeth continued. It was about evolution. The boys were programmed for aggression, the girls for predation. And you didn't disappoint. Nathaniel muttered something, but she silenced him with a wave. Stage 1 is complete. Now, let's see what happens when the hunters leave the cage. Ben was the first to move, lunging at us with a guttural roar. My body reacted before my mind did, the knife flashing in my hand. I don't remember much after that, just the sound of screams, the sharp tang of blood, and the overwhelming satisfaction that followed. When it was over, I stood in the wreckage, breathing hard. The others were gone, some dead, some fled. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I stepped outside for the first time in weeks, the cool air stinging my skin. The world felt different. Or maybe I was. I didn't run right away. After everything that happened in the mansion, I wasn't sure where to go or who I was anymore. The others were either dead or scattered into the night. I stayed long enough to hear the distant whine of sirens, but when the lights from the police cars started to flash against the windows, my body moved on its own. I ran barefoot into the woods behind the house, branches tearing at my skin, the damp earth cold beneath my feet. The trees stretched tall and dark, closing me in. My breath was ragged, my chest aching, but I didn't stop until the mansion was far behind me. By the time I reached the edge of town, the sky was lightening into a dull gray. Everything looked ordinary, cars lined the streets, early risers walked their dogs, a delivery truck rumbled past. It felt wrong, like I'd stepped into a dream where the world continued as if nothing had happened. I slipped into my house quietly, hoping not to wake my mom. My hands were still stained with blood, and I smelled like the woods. I crept into the bathroom, locking the door behind me, and stared into the mirror. My face was smudged with dirt, hair tangled and wild. There were faint scratches along my neck, bruises on my arms. My hands trembled as I turned on the faucet, scrubbing at my skin until it was raw. The blood wouldn't come off, not completely. It felt like it had soaked into me, a part of me now. I stayed in the shower until the water ran cold, but it didn't help. When I finally climbed into bed, I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, Freddy's twisted body at the bottom of the stairs, Ben's feral grin, the flash of my own knife as it struck flesh. That night, the hunger came back. It started as a dull ache, then grew into something sharp, demanding. My stomach churned, but I didn't want food. I wanted something else. I could smell my mom in the kitchen, hear the faint clatter of dishes. My mouth watered, and my hands curled into fists. I bit down hard on my lip, the metallic taste of blood snapping me back to reality. I locked my door and shoved my desk against it for good measure. By the third day, the scratches started. At first, they were small, faint red lines on my arms and shoulders. But as the hunger grew, so did the marks. I couldn't stop myself. My nails dug deep, carving into my skin like I was trying to peel something away. I barely recognized myself. My reflection looked thinner, sharper. My eyes seemed too bright, almost animalistic. When I tried to stay still, my body twitched, restless and eager for something I couldn't name. That's when I found the letter. It was slipped under my door, folded neatly. No stamp, no address, just my name in precise handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Congratulations, Amelia. The words made my stomach drop. Stage 2 begins October 1st, transportation will be arranged. I tore the letter to pieces, but the words stayed burned in my mind. I tried to tell my mom what happened, about the mansion, the experiment, the things they did to us. She listened, but her face stayed blank. When I showed her the scratches, she just shook her head. You've been through something horrible, she said softly. But this isn't real. You need help. She didn't understand. No one would. That night, I heard them outside. It started as whispers, faint but insistent. Then came the laughter, low and guttural, like it didn't belong to anything human. Shadows passed by my window, their shapes too quick, too sharp. I stayed pressed against the door, clutching the knife I'd hidden under my pillow. Then came her voice. "Amelia," Elizabeth called, smooth and calm, like a parent coaxing their child. "It's time." I didn't answer. My pulse hammered in my ears, but I stayed still, barely breathing. "You've done so well," she continued. "But you can't stop now. Stage 2 needs you." The whispers grew louder, circling the house. My mom banged on the door, shouting for me to let her in, but I couldn't tell if it was really her. Then the door shook. I stared as the wood splintered, the sound sharp against the growing chaos outside. My reflection in the mirror caught my eye. At first, I thought it was the lighting. But then I looked closer. My face was wrong. My skin seemed stretched, my cheekbones too sharp. My teeth looked longer, my lips pulled into a strange grin I hadn't made. My reflection blinked, but I hadn't. What would you do if you were in their shoes? Could you trust anyone? Could you even trust yourself? And now, the real question, do you think you'd survive stage 2? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that keep you up at night.